Welcome to the Insurgent Pedagogists. If you've heard people talking about decolonising the curriculum, liberating their degree, or heard of the Roads Must Fall movement and wondered what it all means for you or your kids, then this is for you.
If you're wondering what a punk pedagogist is, who this Rhodes guy was anyway, or have any questions about our failing education system, then use the comments section to ask. And while you're there, remember to like and subscribe.
I'm Teleola.
I'm Nick.
And together we are the Insurgent Pedagogists.
Welcome to the one about leaving your ivory towers. This is a wee bit unusual because this is the first time I've done this on my own. Though don't worry, you will be hearing off Teleola later. I'm up in Leeds, she's not. And what I wanted to do was, without her hearing me, was to admit that she's right on something. But don't tell her I said that. She's listened back to some of our podcasts, other people have listened and commented too, and they're a little bit inaccessible. Largely my fault. Background in philosophy, background in law, and I start talking about epistemology and ontology and all that highfalutin crap that means very little to no one. And I was doing it because I thought that this was an inaccessible topic, that it was a complex topic. It certainly is a complex topic, and it's a complex problem, and the solutions will be difficult and complicated. But it can be explained in a simple way, and that was where I think I was possibly failing people. The penny really dropped for me when I was listening to the performance of Black by the rapper Dave for the BRITawards. Because in a song that was entirely accessible, didn't use any of those highfalutin terms, was cheered by thousands, if not millions of people, he expressed all the ideas that I would like to share with everyone through this podcast so simply and so beautifully. His rap begins, "Look, black is beautiful, black is excellent," and then moves on in kind of the third line to say, "It's working twice as hard as the people you know you're better than." So this immediate recognition that yes, there is opportunity, people can achieve, that every time people like me say there's discrimination, there's barriers, people can point to someone and say, well, look, they can do it, look, they can do it. And they can. But in order to get there, they've worked twice as hard. He goes on and says, because you need to double what they do so you can level them. Black is so much deeper than just African American. Our heritage has been severed. You never got to experiment with family trees because they teach you about famine and greed. And he goes on. But that idea that our heritage has been severed is really key to the whole colonisation discussion. The whole idea that some of us are privileged enough to be able to explore our heritage, to understand where we came from, to be proud of some of the elements of our past, to know who we are and where we came from. And for other people, that's just denied them. Their ancestors were traded, their names were changed, the countries that they were traded from were never disclosed. Or all of that history is there, but it's been rewritten. Stories have been written out, things have been essentially lied about, but by being hidden. He carries on, talks about the fact that they're labelled as barbaric, but in fact, the African culture had queens rather than famine. Moves on then to talk about the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. The kid dies, the blacker the killer, the sweeter the news. And if he's white, you'll give him a chance. He's ill and confused. If he's black, he's probably armed. You see and you shoot. And this is something that I talk to my students about, the way the media and so many people express these prejudices without even realising it. And we can see that so evidently in the very recent news about the attacks in Streatham in London and then the attack in the mosque. So we have a Muslim man goes into a shop, steals a knife and stabs some people, immediately labelled as terrorism. We see somebody who isn't white do something and we ask, is it race? Is it religion? A white man goes into a mosque and stabs an imam during prayers in the neck. We immediately hear from the police, this is not being treated as terrorism. The media do not immediately label it as terrorism. Instead of talking about terrorism, we're talking about mental illness. We're talking about damaged people. We're making excuses because this doesn't fit our stereotypes. Our stereotypes of young black men being gangsters and armed, young Muslim men being Muslims and terrorists, and young white men being good, or if they're not good, they're lost, they're confused, they're somehow damaged. And we got the same with the killer of Joe Cox. An absolute fanatic who had BNP literature, Britain First literature, posters all over his flat, clearly an extremist, meets all the definitions of radicalisation, and immediately the press jump on it and start looking at his mental health history. What are his mental health problems? So he makes that point in, I think, just a beautiful 10-word sentence, 10-word phrase. Then he moves on, verse 2. In the middle of verse 2, he's talking about what we've called microaggressions. But just this idea that people treat you in a way that causes harm. Small little ways, but death by 1,000 cuts. So he says, Black is doing all of the above and going corner shopping, trying to help a lady cross the road to have her walking off. And this constant belittling, this constant poor treatment, disrespectful treatment, constant facing of prejudice. And he moves on. Towards the end of that second verse, he says, you don't know the truth about your race because they're erasing it. Black has got a sour fucking flavour, here's a taste of it. But black is all I know, there ain't a thing I would change in it. Now there's two things that those three sentences or three lines say to me. The first is back to this idea of our heritage being severed, about your race because they're erasing it. The idea that history is being rewritten and all positive images of blackness are being written out and negative images of blackness being promoted, negative images of whiteness being written out, the white man as always the hero, as the saviour. But then it goes on, but black is all I know, there ain't a thing that I would change in it. And this really struck me because we are so obsessed in higher education with the deficit model that there is something wrong with people who aren't achieving. We don't want to change. Higher education isn't ready to change, doesn't want to change. We want to stay still and we want people to meet us where we are. And that involves people changing. We are saying there is something wrong with you. You need to do resilience training. You need to become more confident. You need to become more like me in order to achieve. But there is nothing wrong with our black students. There is nothing wrong with our black students. And actually, to hear Dave say in this lyric that ain't a thing that I would change in it, actually, I found really moving. I was like, great that we've got someone who's actually going to say, not only should I not change, but I don't want to change. I need to embrace who I am. I want to hold on to who I am and what that means. And he goes on to talk about blackness and what blackness means, and he doesn't use the BAME term, the black and minority ethnic term, which is great because it's a horrific term. But he says, black ain't just a single fucking colour, man, there's shades to it. Her hair straight and thick, but mine's got waves in it. And this idea of what black isn't one identity, one amorphous blob. And it is used in different ways. Black with a capital B being a sense of political identity and actually embracing lots and lots of people who are not necessarily African or Caribbean, but Asian, or anything that's not white, in essence, to the kind of the BAME version where we call it black, Asian and minority ethnic, where we're subdividing. But he's saying that, we're a huge group, a diverse group, but there are things that we share. Goes on again, back to this idea of history. It's representing countries that never even existed while your grandmother was living. The scramble for Africa, the way that the Europeans fucked up an entire continent, drew lines that meant nothing to anybody except where we were going to divide this country up, and then made people live there and still operate there as if these are states. And he goes on to the way they were named. Black is people naming your countries and what they trade most. Coast of Ivory, Gold Coast and the Grain Coast. But most importantly, to show how deep all of this pain goes, West Africa, Benin, they called it Slave Coast. So not only have we divided up a continent that was never ours to divide up, we've then named it on the basis of almost the aisles in a supermarket. What do we trade from which bit? We expect that history is just accepted unquestionably, that those names for countries are just adopted by the people who come. And then he moves on. And Dave was a law student before he moved into music. So he knew law. So he's got the same experiences as my law students. But he identifies where he comes from in relation to law. And this is something we fail to see so often, is our students come at the law from different directions, from different angles. And if we can't recognise that and make it accessible to them, we are excluding some students and enabling others. In terms of law, there are two lines. They're a bit apart. I'll read the first one first. So, poverty made me a beast, I battled the law in the streets, is the first line. And then a bit later on he says, black is being guilty until proven that you're innocent. That's not my experiences of law growing up. I didn't battle law in the streets. Nobody looks at me and assumes that I'm guilty of something and I've done something wrong. I walk in to the waiting room of a court and people assume that I'm there defending somebody, that I'm there working. They don't assume that I'm the defendant. They don't assume that I'm guilty. They don't assume that I've got a history of battling the police in the streets. So I come at law from a very different angle. And if I think that angle is the only way to come at law and the only opening that my students can come at the law from, I'm excluding anyone who's got this different experience. And this different experience isn't a matter of choice. Dave didn't choose to be guilty until proven innocent. This isn't people choosing to put themselves on the wrong side of the criminal justice system. This is the criminal justice system choosing to stereotype people and then pinning that stereotype on them. Then he finishes this bit of the original lyrics, back at this idea of he wouldn't change it. So black is like the sweetest fucking flavour, here's a taste of it. But black is all I know, there ain't a thing that I would change in it. And that's where it ends as a song, except for the BRITawards version, because when he did it live at the BRITawards, he added a verse at the end of it, talking about the racist Prime Minister and various other things which you can listen to, and I'm sure you'd all agree with him. But I just wanted to focus on the things that really, really stuck out for me. The line, equality is a right, it doesn't deserve credit. How powerful is that as a statement? Equality is a right, it doesn't deserve credit. Why are we living in a society where we are seeking kite marks, awards at the bottom of our signature, praising people and patting them on the back for not being racist, for not being sexist, for not being homophobic? Why is that something we reward rather than just expect as standard? We have events where we clap and cheer and give out prizes to people for not being too racist. It's sick. And he goes on, how the news treats Kate versus how they treated Meghan. And we see that vile racism buried within the news, that somebody is applauded for everything that they do, can do no wrong, and somebody else is picked up for every single thing they do, and it is criticised. He then goes on to do a whole set of lines about Jack Merritt, his brother in arms. And Jack Merritt, if you remember, was the Cambridge University student who was stabbed to death in a terror attack. He was white, he was rich, he was privileged, yet Dave is talking about him being a brother in arms. And it brings us back to this idea of what is it that white people like me can do to ally themselves with black people. And certainly not to just stand with them, certainly not to pretend that we can understand, because I can never understand what it would be like to face microaggressions on a daily basis, to grow up being black in Britain. And the other thing is that if I go and stand with the black community and work with the black community, I'm in a way taking an easy route out. This isn't the route that Jack Merritt took. and it's good to hear that he's being praised for what he did. He worked with his community. Yeah, racism is a problem in my white community. So if I'm going to be an ally to people who are facing racism and suffering racism, I can start by working in my white community, challenging the racism I see in my white community and making it better. It shouldn't be the job of the black community to not only deal with the problems with their own community, but also change somebody else's community for them. And equally, it's another form of colonisation. If I go into a community and say, here I am, riding in as your saviour, I'm going to make it all better for you. The best that I can do is work within my community and listen. Listen, respect, and give to some extent what they want. And then at the end, there's 3 lines, and these lines really struck me, because in the decolonisation debate, we're trying to seek easy wins. We're talking about what we call in staff development takeaways. You know, what tick chart can somebody do? What easy wins can somebody have on the decolonisation debate? How can we take racism? How can we make sure that higher education isn't institutionally racist? And we're talking about things like making sure we've got more black authors on the reading list. Yeah, making sure that we perhaps get a bit better at pronouncing some of the names on our registers. But listen to what Dave says at the end of it. But Grenfell victims still need accommodation, and we still need support for the Windrush generation. Reparations for the time our people spent on plantations. And then there's the mic drop at the end. I have been worrying about whether or not I've got enough black authors on my reading lists. That's relevant, it's correct, but it isn't going to deal with a problem. If the problem of a colonised curriculum, a colonised higher education system, a higher education system that excludes people, is that our black students are seeing migrant populations and black British populations from Grenfell homeless and needing accommodation, if they're seeing the Windrush generation being rounded up, if they're seeing Jamaicans being rounded up and flown back to their countries if they've got no right to be here and no right to be British, if they're seeing this history where we have essentially raped a country of its resources and we are doing nothing to give it back, they're seeing all of that, they're feeling all of that, they're living all of that. And my response is to say, but wait, I've got a book by Adishe on my reading list. I've got some black authors. I've got a black visiting speaker coming in to talk to you. I'm really not nailing the problem. To conclude what I'm saying, and then Tele's going to, by the magic of recording, come back and talk about some of this, I think, and possibly interject. This is real, it is raw, and it spoke to me. And it spoke to me in a way that I am not speaking to other people, because I'm using highfalutin terms and I'm sat in my academic ivory tower. And I love the fact that that is the phrase that we use, because our academic ivory towers are shiny and white, and they are full of whiteness and they are full of privilege, and there's so much that we can unpack in that phrase. But I'm sat there trying to explain something in the most inaccessible, lofty, privileged, arrogant way. And yet Dave can stand up on a stage and communicate all of this brilliantly in just a few minutes of song. So hopefully that's unpacked what he said and made some of this a bit simpler.
Our Grenfell victims still need accommodation, and we still need support for the Windrush generation, reparations for the time our people spent on plantations.
So I've listened to what Nick has to say about Dave's poem, and I agree with quite a lot of what he said. I think the only thing I would like to add would be in regards to the role of white people in this talk about decolonisation. Firstly, what the black community want from white people is to get it. And by getting it, I mean that it's not a level playing field for black and white people. And even if you come from a low-income background, you're white and you come from a low-income background, you're still on a better footing than a black person in the same income bracket as you. Now, this is not your fault, but the structural inequalities within society work in a way that benefits you and doesn't benefit people who've got black or brown skin. It is the reality. So getting it is the first thing. Now, when you get it, the next step is to understand that you cannot understand, a white person cannot understand what it feels like to be black. More so what it feels like to be black within a society where blackness carries baggage. And by baggage, I mean everything that Nick has spoken about. And that's fine. But you do understand how you feel when you're judged unfairly. The third point to consider is Britain's legacy of slavery and oppression that is yet to be addressed. Nick spoke about structural inequalities being complicated problems. And I think it's important that HE understands that this lack of addressing the legacy of slavery and oppression permeates British culture and society. And the symptoms are exhibited through racial intolerance. We saw that with the Windrush generation. We also saw a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric during the Brexit referendum and after that. So going back to the way that we teach students and what we teach them, there's this whole bit of history that's been rewritten that places the white man as the saviour, the white man as the victor, and every other person as either savage or, basically dehumanized people. So if we are to decolonize the curriculum, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's almost a deconstructing of the current way that we teach students. A fourth and final point then is, how should white people who get it respond? Should you stand with the black community and work with them? My response to this would be stand, but don't work in the black community. Black people get it. We know what the problems are. We've known for a very long time. And there's a slippery slope when you're in that position, when you work within as a white person, we work within the black community. There's a slippery slope to becoming the white savior again. So what we want, the way we want white people who get it to respond is work within your community. Racism, like Nick said, is a white people problem. Majority of it is a white people problem. So what you need to do is stay in your community and educate your community. That's the best way to be an ally. And then once your community gets it, we sit at the table together. So this isn't white people telling black people, okay, so now we understand your problem and we'll fix it for you. That's the way things have been, and it hasn't worked. So we need to sit at the table together and work together and reconstruct a curriculum that works for everyone. And that is my vision of an insurgent pedagogy.
We've been the Insurgent Pedagogists. Thanks for tuning in.
No one's tuned in. We're not on the wireless.
Okay, but if our listener has any questions, she can write them on a postcard and send them in to us.
No, we'd love to hear people's questions, but they can just post them in the comment section below. And while they're there, they can like and subscribe too.
And if you want to know more about us, we're on the interweb at wordpress.com/insurgent pedagogy.
Spot on. We've been Teleola and Nick. The music was from www.bensound.com.